I'm not going to read Žak Ozmo's bio. Just remember OZMO. Look him up. He's a savant. He's a PhD. He is an expert on musical instruments. He directed the Laventura Symphony in London. He actually commuted from Memphis to London, directing a symphony that plays classical music in their original instruments. I know with Baroque, a lot of you know of that, but hearing Beethoven, hearing all the great classics. And how did we get him here? Thank God for spouses. His wife is a professor at Rhodes College. So he would commute from here. And last year, some of you may want to look up, those of you watching, if you look at our holidays last year, I asked Dr. Ozmo to talk about his work in music and healing, literally the neuroscience with doctors prescribing music. That was last year's talk. But being a very active member of this congregation with 2 daughters who fill our religious school and Sundays with life, Jacques' story that he doesn't often tell. He did a TED Talk on why immigrants are important for the arts or what they add to the arts, but I wanted him to talk about his life, his perspective on the subject that's been on so many of our minds. And I'm looking at a few friends here who have relatives from Europe, like Alex Saharovich, who just spoke, and who have a totally different understanding of the world because you lived in a different part of the world, whereas others like us, we think we're worldly because we've been to Santa Monica and Manhattan. I'm going to stop there. Dr. Žak Ozmo.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a privilege to be here for so many different ways. My name is Žak Ozmo, and I was born in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in former Yugoslavia. Žak was not a common name in my country. I was named after my grandfather's brother Yakov, a poet and publisher. My grandfather insisted that my parents use a French version of the name to mask my Jewish heritage in the world that had allowed the Holocaust to happen. I later learned that this was a common practice among Sephardic Jews in the Balkans. He was a Holocaust survivor who navigated his siblings and immediate family through the horrors of the Second World War. My grandfather Albert was my role model, someone who worked hard, achieved a lot, and had enough wisdom and confidence to walk away from everything he built to save the lives of his family. He was a real estate developer who owned large parts of our city and dreamt of retiring at 40. And yet, when the Nazis reached Bosnia, he mobilized his family, and on one summer morning, in place of going on a day trip and only carrying picnic baskets, they reached the part of the country occupied by Italian forces. Being taken to a camp run by Italians rather than Germans at that time often meant the difference between life and death. Jews that hesitated in the face of the German Nazi invasion or were otherwise slowed down perished, including my grandmother's family. After the camp was liberated, my grandparents returned home. On one Wednesday evening, my grandmother recounted to me, there was a knock on the door. 2 gentlemen in black coats came to the door to have my grandfather sign nationalization documents. He was to sign all his properties over to the new government. In my grandmother's words, he invited them in and said, "My dear wife, bring some food and drinks for these gentlemen that came to relieve me of my burdens." There was nothing else to do. Not only was he a former businessman being scrutinized by the new communist government, but he was also a Jewish businessman. Surviving the war alone was more than he and his family could have hoped for. The new government nevertheless recognized people who could help rebuild the country. He was the director of companies that needed to be restarted and then moved from company to company as he would put them on their feet. The family was still respected, but no longer affluent. My grandfather became one of the prominent Jewish leaders in the country. But the notion that we were rich Jews remained. It may not have been visible, one of the rumors went, but we had pots of gold buried in the foundation of the house where we lived. Every so often I remember those pots of gold, wondering where could they be hiding. In my extended family, marrying people of different religious backgrounds was common. When you live in a country whose Jewish population was decimated in the Second World War, this was a natural progression of things. I think that every ethnicity and religious group in Yugoslavia was represented within the extended family. And yet, there was no question that we were Jewish, that my family is Jewish, not only because of the prevailing Jewish tradition and family lore, but also because the society around us left us no doubt as to how we were perceived. We were the Ozmo family. We were Jewish. My grandfather felt particularly strongly about inclusivity among the Jewish people. The world makes no distinctions, so why do we? The first time I heard about various degrees of Jewishness was after my grandfather's sister Rahela moved with her husband to the United States. On one of their trips back home, she expressed the ideas about who is really Jewish and who is not, which were emphasized to her by the Jews who had not experienced the Holocaust. My grandfather and the rest of the family were incensed. None of this mattered to Hitler. Nazis attempted to devise their own criteria in Nuremberg race laws of 1938, which were to serve to isolate the Jewish people from German society. However, as the war progressed, they expanded their definitions and then ignored them completely with the goal of the complete destruction of the Jewish people. And anti-Semitic mobs hunting for Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe never cared or even knew about these distinctions to begin with. You were likely to end up in the camp and be killed or slaughtered in the street of nearby forest just the same. The first time I was introduced to the idea of who a real Jew is and who is not, based on your method of religious observance, family heritage, and so on, was ironically, for me at least, during a trip to Israel. It's human nature, I suppose. Once people live in a comparative safety, whether as Jews in a Jewish state or a cosmopolitan North American city, only then can you focus on such petty differences among your own people. Are you a Reform, conservative, or Orthodox Jew? Are you Sephardic or Ashkenazi? Are you a Jew with both Jewish parents, or only one, and if one, which one? Or a Jew purely by choice? And how easy do we forget? In Nazi Germany, we would all have been killed together. The life of my family was one of walking a fine line between engaging with society and trying to steer clear of anti-Semitism that lurked in the shadows. On the one hand, we remained a well-known family, prominent members of the society with strong links with the community and friendships with non-Jews. A family who was my family's best friends and whose older son I see to this day as my own brother are Muslims. In terms of values, we invested in education. History has taught us that everything else can be taken away. My grandfather became a leader of the Jewish community in the city and was heavily engaged in interfaith relations. Anti-Semitism in my home country was contradictory to the official national policy. After the invasion of Yugoslavia by the Axis powers in 1941, the occupying powers and their helpers sought to systematically incite hatred among the many national, ethnic, and religious groups in Yugoslavia. So after the war ended, there was officially very little tolerance for nationalism and ethnic religious discrimination of any kind. Brotherhood and unity evolved into a guiding principles of Yugoslavia post-war inter-ethnic strategy. However, anti-Semitism persisted in the shadows and drew on ignorance, ancient myths, and conspiracy theories. It came from individuals. Occasionally, international politics came into the mix as well. On more than one occasion, my grandfather was called into a local police station to be asked what he thought about wars and military operations that Israel had been involved in. You see, Yugoslavia was a leader of the non-aligned movement, and Israel's Arab neighbors were considered allies. My father once recounted a story of being called an offensive, derogatory name for a Jew by a business partner, a Muslim, after a meeting. The outrage came from my father's close friend, also Muslim, who overheard the conversation and went on to evoke equally offensive, derogatory terms for people of his own faith, explaining that this was the same thing. The offending party was shocked. Ignorance played a role, as it was obvious that he came from an environment where such language was normalized. But as history teaches us, ignorance can be lethal. I'm not sure that my father himself would have said much. The number of Jews in my hometown was so small that you felt powerless to do much about such incidents. You were exposed and vulnerable and hoped that strong links with the community would protect you. It took me a long time to start aggressively calling people out on anti-Semitic statements instead of accepting that the world is just the way it is. I attribute this to generational PTSD. Victims of abuse and trauma behave this way. Abusers make shocking, untruthful statements and accusations, and victims back down. We cower in horror, remembering the historical persecution that accompanied such statement. In 1990, the first serious political and armed skirmishes started in my home country, Yugoslavia. In 1991, two of the republics, Slovenia and Croatia, declared independence from the Federation and were confronted by the increasingly fragmented Serb-dominated Yugoslav People's Army. Despite the initial signs, most of the people I knew, including my own family, could not have imagined the horrible armed conflict that would follow. As the vicious and growing atrocities started to shake the land, the plague of war gradually moved towards my home republic, Bosnia and Herzegovina. As political tensions, conspiracy theories, and problems such as food shortages and lost jobs seeped into Bosnia and started to sow discord among its Muslim, Croatian, and Serb population, I remembered the uneasy thoughts of what darkness might be hiding in the hearts of people I thought I knew, offset by the familiarity of my incrementally changing surroundings. I distinctly recall watching a news segment on television in which a reporter was interviewing a tall young man guarding the entrance to his village while holding an enormous gun. "Who are you waiting for?" the reporter asked. "Them," answered the young man, pointing away from his village. "I will kill them all." "Who is them?" the reporter asked. "Them," the young man answered again, gesturing into the distance. He didn't know who them were, but someone had told him that these people were different enough to be dangerous. He felt scared and powerless, and someone handed him the big gun, and he was ready to kill. The extreme polarization in my society happened gradually. Manipulated by unscrupulous leaders, people searched for simple solutions to complex problems and began to look for someone to blame. Nationalist leaders used these people's fears to propel themselves to power and hold on to it no matter the consequence. Differences were highlighted, and the other was gradually dehumanized. Then everything exploded, and the avalanche started its deadly journey. People started killing, bodies started piling up, concentration camps, mass graves, and depravity that makes you ashamed to belong to humanity. In the end, the deaths affected everyone, and the country was left in ruins. Jewish people were not the focus of this conflict in my country. However, I feel that what happened there made me understand better the progression of the Nazi homicidal madness during the Second World War. In Judaism, Satan is not a sentient being, but a metaphor for the evil inclination, Yatzer Hara, that exists in every person. Understanding that this inclination follows a pattern regardless of where or when we are is a key to stopping it. My first interaction with the United States was as an exchange student in rural America. Anti-Semitic views were normalized and shocking. I suspected I am the only Jewish person my host family has ever had contact with. They were well-meaning people, but their lack of awareness often made them offensive. I found the self-righteous intolerance of anything other than people like themselves alarming. I have already seen such intolerance being manipulated with deadly results. My experience as a Jew in this country has been very contradictory. On the one hand, in the United States, I witnessed some of the vilest anti-Semitic slurs and stereotypes I could have imagined. Shockingly, the same ones accompanied the slaughter of Jews in Nazi Europe. On the other hand, I was startled by and then became very proud of the strength of the Jewish community and the expressions of Jewishness in this country. This freedom has allowed Jewish people to ascend to the highest echelons of society and be proud Americans. This dichotomy, however, has given me pause. A higher percentage of German Jews fought in World War I than any other ethnic, religious, or political group in Germany. Under the Weimar Republic from 1919 to 1933, German Jews played a major role in politics and diplomacy and strengthened their position in financial, economic, and cultural affairs. Jewish intellectuals and creative professionals were among the leading figures in many areas of Weimar culture. And yet, Hitler and the Nazi Party succeeded in weaponizing ancient intolerance and conspiracy theories, leading to the dehumanization and systematic murder of 6 million Jews. A historical result of the development of one religion from another, anti-Semitism is a consequence of attempted religious parasite. The proponents of a nascent, younger religion tried to invalidate the older one to assert their new religious identity and belief system. And in doing so, they cast their spiritual ancestor as the other, similar enough to remain a part of the society, yet sufficiently different to be made a target of populist rage whenever the quest for power demands. The Jewish people have endured this for close to 2,000 years. A scholar featured in a recent PBS TV miniseries titled The U.S. and the Holocaust stated that the Nazis decried the Jews as the people who brought the notions of conscience, golden rule, fair play, and international cooperation into the world. They saw Jews as being responsible for every global, universal idea, for everything that allowed us to see each other as people instead of members of a race. I would say that it is clear why such people would be a threat to dictators and tyrants. On the other hand, the formation of the State of Israel in the last centuries has further become the fodder for the so-called new anti-Semitism, where the Jewish people worldwide are held collectively responsible for the actions of the Israeli government. As the Holocaust recedes from the collective memory of the world, expressions of anti-Semitic intolerance are again made glaring by the current populist wave. So what do we do? In my opinion, we first need to remember that anti-Semitism never vanished. Over the past few years, it may have been encouraged and is more visible, but it is nothing new. We have lived with it all this time, yet as Jewish people, we survived, persevered, prospered, and grew stronger. As we gather this Yom Kippur in this temple Israel, this large, remarkable building surrounded by so many friends, enjoyed by so many more online, we need to remember that this is not historically a standard fare for most international Jewry. Rather, this is an exception, a blessing, and a sign of strength. The awareness of the constant and present danger of anti-Semitism is needed to help us keep perspective. Divisions among the Jewish people are a luxury we cannot afford. A Reform, conservative or Orthodox Jew, Sephardim or Ashkenazi, a political conservative or liberal, a Jew with both Jewish parents or only one, regardless of which one, or a Jew purely by choice. We are all a part of the same tapestry of the Jewish people, and removing any single thread can make this tapestry come apart. We cannot cower as our surroundings gradually change. The history of our people is laced with the false belief that if we tread softly, we will be left alone. That has, of course, not been the case. We need to engage with our community. Ignorance has historically been a fertile ground for anti-Semitism, and close interfaith relationships can save lives. We must fearlessly speak out against anti-Semitic rhetoric at all levels of society. Silence sends a message that such remarks are acceptable. Fight for social justice is our fight. Hatred and discrimination do not stop with one group. Nazi policy towards Jews and their plans for conquest in Eurasia were reportedly partly inspired by the American anti-immigrant strategies, the eugenics movement, and the treatment of Native Americans. The anti-Semites in this country don't just hate Jews, they hate the idea of multiracial democracy, of political equality. They hate immigrants, people of color, LGBTQ people, women. The cancer of intolerance spreads, increasingly narrowing the definition of the one right way, while normalizing exclusion, dehumanization, and extermination of all others. If we don't speak up for others, no one will be left to speak up for us. We need to invest in our communities. Poverty is a fertile ground for anti-Semitism and intolerance of all sorts, as populist leaders mask their failures in leadership by scapegoating minorities. And lastly, as Jews in diaspora, we must look for ways of re-engaging with the State of Israel. Over the years, the internal narrative in Israel has become increasingly disconnected from the international Jewry. I, for one, believe that international Jewry would be much less safe without the existence of the State of Israel. But the deepening gulf in mutual understanding and often the values will inevitably affect the Jewish people's future and safety. Anti-Semitism does not have to be an avalanche that sweeps us away while we stand there helplessly. There has, in fact, not been a time in modern history when we were less helpless. Being Jewish is not only a religion, ancestry, and culture. It is also an idea of people who overcame adversity, survived, persevered, and succeeded. And on this day, around us are being sounded the same Hebrew words, melodies, and sentiments that gave comfort to our people for millennia. And that in itself is saying so very much. Thank you.
This professor and Temple family member never disappoints. It's always a gift. Thank you for your mind as well as your heart. We have time for questions, and I hope this will be interactive with Dr. Ozmo. Any questions for Jacques? I know that was such a well-done paper that we all may want to watch the video again just to get every paragraph. Elliot, and I'm going to get the, I'm sorry, the microphone's over here.
Prior to World War II,
Yes.
a lot of Jews got out of Germany. A lot more would have left. Hey,
Excuse me. Yeah, if you can repeat the question for those.
prior to World War II, a lot of Jews got out of Germany. A lot more would have left had the world allowed Jewish immigration. would Hitler have allowed all those Jews to have left, or was his intention all along to kill Jews?
Well, that is, one would guess based on what happened that his intention was kill the Jews.
We all know it was gradual, right? We all know about the Avian Conference, not the water.
Yeah.
But it was a meeting of over 28 countries to deal with the Jewish question of immigration. Follow the sentence. You cannot live here as Jews, so you convert. You cannot live here became you cannot live. But the final solution was not devised until January of 1942 at the Wannsee Conference in Berlin. There's a famous story about the Nazi officer high up who offered the British something like 10,000 Jewish babies if he would arrange for munitions and trucks. So 10,000 Jewish babies for 10,000 trucks. And do you know what the British official said, or I don't want to pick on Her Majesty because it may not have been Britain, said, not, we'll give you 5,000 trucks instead of 10,000 trucks. But the conversation went, what are we going to do with 10,000 Jewish babies? And hung up the phone. So Hitler in his diaries and other felt like they were doing the world a favor. And that's partly what Ken Burns' documentary made us realize, right? So the world was on. I didn't mean to preempt that.
No.
Anything you want to add to it?
Absolutely, but just in terms of the process, this process is always gradual.
Keep talking.
Process is always gradual. One thing is done, then it gets normalized, then it goes further, that's normalized, then it goes further. And then after a while of things developing gradually starts like an avalanche, is how I see it. Because I do really think looking at historical events, looking at what happened back home, that's how it develops. When this dehumanization and discrimination is normalized sufficiently to the certain degree, then they can do anything. So,
Right. The world did not, right.
yeah.
Jacques, I want to just, we're going to get to the, you didn't share as much because I know you so well, and I love the story. The name of the town that he's from is Zenitsa, which means the pupil of the eye. It's literally in the middle of the country, like the pupil. Would you share more about the Jewish life of your family? I mean, your grandfather's brother was the chief rabbi, the way people interacted with each other, Jews, Christian, and Muslims, and that process?
I mean, that is, yes, my grandfather's cousin became chief rabbi for Yugoslavia. My grandfather was one of the Jewish leaders in the country. But what did happen after a while, that interfaith relationships became very strong in the city. And because partly your life depended on it. And there was a strong sense of it after all the hostilities in the Second World War, where a lot of animosities were awakened, the way they were awakened in the Civil War later on, by bringing back ancient hatreds between ethnicities. So there was a big emphasis on protecting oneself from this. So literally in our home, I met local priests and imams, and they would just come and, they had deep, important conversations with my grandfather, and they were drinking coffee and, debate the nature of the world and religion. And so that was, fairly early on, that gave me quite a perspective on things. But even so, and I just described, how this emphasis on this brotherhood and unity, but even so, it was possible to break all of that up and to have people go killing each other. And it's a process. It's a process that you can detect. It's a progression of sowing divisions, of exploiting people's legitimate fears and insecurities and economic hardship, pointing at a particular group, making them a scapegoat, and that's how populism moves, and it's a pattern in all these cases. And why it's so important to keep that in mind, you can see it when it starts. And you have to know what it is in order to stop it.
Jacques, I never asked you this over our conversations, but why didn't Mom leave? Your
Last hour, Alex talked about how his mom worked down the desk from Ceausescu, didn't he say? Ceausescu's. I'm fascinated by your family. I know we don't have time to talk about Benzion and all of them, but your mother was quite a professional herself, was she not?
Yeah, my mom was an engineer. Well, why she didn't?
She lived this reality, and when the war started, there was no way out.
There was no way out. They were.
Give them the date, so because we were all here in '94, and so when did this all?
Well, so my mom was, she was killed by a shrapnel in '93, having coffee with a friend. Because even the war has started, you still try to have your life as normal as possible, and people try to go on about their business. But this was gradually. At first, you don't believe, you hear about the danger, you don't really believe it's possible. It starts moving closer, people closer to you start being affected, you hear about deaths. Then you have this string of events. You have economy collapsing, people losing jobs, there's a fear, there's conspiracy theories. Some people that see it, they do their best to leave. Other people don't believe it's possible. You don't believe it's possible. You don't believe it can happen. And my father, particularly, he didn't believe something like that would be possible. My mom didn't want to leave without him. So, they stayed, and my sister stayed as well. But, for a long time, I really did, in my head, I blamed him. Did he not remember the lessons of his own parents, his own father, that the moment he saw it coming, danger coming, they all picked up and left? But then, during this pandemic, I actually thought about my father a lot in terms of that. Because yes, for example, we have a house here, we have, a life here, my girls have friends here, we have friends here, Temple Israel is here. And then let's say the danger is coming, you don't know what's happening. You hear about conspiracy theories, people are arming themselves, what is this? But you don't know, you don't want to believe that it's possible for something so horrible to happen, and you're waiting. And you're waiting. And that was the moment where actually I could understand my dad. He waited. I wish he didn't, but he waited. But I can understand how that would happen.
Vanessa, was your hand up? Oh, okay, I was hoping. Ladies and gentlemen, the only member of Temple Israel and probably in the Jewish community from Bari, not the Midtown restaurant, but Italy himself, Onofrio Armanise. I'm going to get you the microphone so everybody online can hear you. Yes, we do have a restaurant in Memphis named Bari. Why am I talking about food? Oh, because we're fasting. Yes. Go ahead, Onofrio.
Hi, Professor, how are you? I have just a question. Based on your experience, I'm from Bari, Italy, so from Europe, I've seen authoritarianism going with Mussolini before and everything. So you've seen your side of the Adriatic, right? Because basically, one in front of the other. Do you think that authoritarianism can come to this country right now for what we've seen?
That all of this will come to this country?
Yeah, if they can come to this country, where they never seen really dictatorship and stuff like that. So I wonder if, given what the events have been happening here in the U.S., where elections are no good and this and that, do you think there is a probability here to happen?
That's a tricky thing to be asked.
Yeah.
The patterns are there, but whether things come to the country or not depends on how people react to it. It's not simply, as I said, it's not an avalanche that comes and takes you away, but you have to see that it's happening in order to stop it. So I don't think it has to come, to this country, but it all depends on people understanding that it can happen anywhere, and then seeing the signs of it, and then doing what they can to stop it. So that's all.
So many hands. Please, yes, next to Faith.
Go. Yes.
And then,
How did you meet your wife?
How did I meet my wife? Oh, that was, well, this is more cheerful.
there we go.
Actually, we were in grad school in Los Angeles. We went to USC together. So we went to Los Angeles.
What's the instrument like is it the lute?
Oh, so the instruments that I play is the lute, some of them. The lute family of instruments, which were some of the main instruments in European music making for hundreds of years. So I like them.
Please.
Hi, say my name. Hi, my name is Celia Snyder. I'm actually a new member of the community. Happy to be here. I'm from Boston.
Oh, your name is?
I'm from Newton.
Newton?
Yeah.
North or south?
Newton South. Where?
You go to Newton South? No, because I'm from Boston. My dad was a rabbi there. And the way people don't know that, they know that I'm not from Memphis because I call the hotel the Peabody. It's Peabody, Mass. Yeah, they don't get it right here. Go ahead, question.
Yeah, north or south for you?
I'm actually a friend, family both.
Oh, okay.
I go both ways.
And I'm sorry, did you say her name is Celia?
Celia.
Oh, that's my daughter's name.
Really?
Yeah. Good name, good name.
Well, go for her. So you touched, speaking of names, you touched very briefly on your name and the fact that it was given to you, it was unusual, and it was sort of to hide your heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So my question for you is, how do you feel as an adult about that now? Would you rather have a Jewish name that is part of your heritage, is passed on, or are you happy with how things turned out?
You know, the story of my name is a bit of like a story of the Jewish people. When I was applying to USC, the director of the program called me because they were offering a scholarship, and he said, well, you already have a stage name, so, you may as well start your career. So you take the disadvantage that you were given, and in the end, you turn it into an advantage. So that is actually how I see my name.
So I was thinking about your grandfather and then your father.
Yes.
And your grandfather could see right away, and then your father didn't. So what is the special ingredient to be able to know when to go?
Well, you could say wisdom. I don't know if even that's what it is. I think it's confidence. It's confidence. It's confidence that how I always saw it in my grandfather's case, he achieved a lot. He saw that there is a danger coming, and you leave it because you can achieve a lot again.
So is it like foresight? Is it?
Well, you understand. It's not the foresight. I think that my dad as well saw what was happening. It's just the confidence to leave what you have created. Because my father used to tell me, well, I can't leave as a refugee at this stage of my life with a plastic bag. Whereas my grandfather obviously didn't care about it. Like, he created what he created once. He knew that he can do it, and he felt he can do it again, as long as they're all alive. I think that my father didn't feel that same way, because I do think in the end, it comes to confidence, comes to not feeling that you're tied to that thing, that there are things that are more important. And as long as that is there, everything else can be taken care of.
There's a whole row with questions, so maybe you could combine them. I'm not sure who to hand it to.
Hi, my name's Ellen. I'm French.
Enchanté.
Well, I'm also American.
Oh, nice
But
to meet
never
you.
mind about that. For now, I've just visited both the Netherlands and France and Switzerland because my relatives live there. I was kind of appalled at stuff that's happening there. What do you know about the things happening there? And if so, what do you, I mean, for Jewish people, and what do you think of it? And does it scare you?
Well, of course, it concerns one greatly. What I did find, because I lived in London for many years, so I used to go to Paris a lot. And anti-Semitism, resurgent anti-Semitism in London as well, in London and Paris as well. What I found is that a lot of times, visibly, it was led by the Muslim refugees who are there, who, however, are disenfranchised themselves in a very difficult position. And I did constantly feel that their grievances were being manipulated by the far right in Europe.
Are you aware that there was a miniature Kristallnacht? There was a miniature Kristallnacht in the Rivierenbuurt, which is the river neighborhood in Amsterdam. And those were Christians who did that. They killed several Jewish families.
No. I didn't say that there. I don't blame this on one particular.
Yeah.
No. I'm not blaming this on one particular.
This is the most global human, so that's not what he's saying.
That's not what I'm saying at all.
At all.
What I was saying is that there were people that found themselves in a very difficult situation in Europe, and their grievances were manipulated the way that is by the alt-right, who very anti-Semitically, who they extend that same treatment to them as well. But this was the situation where is created due to the conflicts in the Middle East, where this can now be directed at this time towards the Jews.
Another question.
This is a follow-up to your response to what Sally was saying about confidence and about rebuilding. We understand that anti-Semitism never goes away, but it ebbs and flows in terms of where the direction of hate leads itself towards. My question is, I'm not really sure how to phrase this, but we were talking before about how we need to come together, as one people instead of focusing on the specific details and trying to isolate who is who. My question is, after the danger has passed, how do we keep ourselves from having to focus on those details again?
Oh, sadly, it's a basic human condition to start focusing on these differences because you have nothing else to think about. But I think emphasizing the perspective is something that has to be done.
We're going to end, but can we talk about your sister who stayed and the Jewish community as far as what happened after the horror and where are things now?
Yeah,
back home.
So my sister's Jewish community is very small, but my sister stayed, and she is officially, she is practically leading the Jewish community in the city. It's very difficult because there are not very many people left, but still she represents the Jewish community in that interfaith context, and you see her, she sends me television clips whenever there's a lot that is happening there around holidays where it reminds me, what happens in Memphis reminds me of what is happening in Zenica. You see the religious leaders coming together and having fun, doing functions together and talks together. And my sister, since the city doesn't have a rabbi at the moment, so my sister is the face of the Jewish community in the city.
Yes, we could clap. So Zenitza's loss is Memphis's gain, and this isn't a guest speaker. This is a member of our congregation, so hopefully you'll get to know him. He is now a professor at the University of Tennessee. And you want to tell them for just 30 seconds, this is interesting because we're going to be going into the sanctuary for music, more music, as well as online if you prefer to study with Dr. Levy, if you don't want music. But tell them about what you're doing now at the University of Tennessee. We got 2 minutes. This is fascinating work. Nothing to do with anti-Semitism.
I'm leading and developing a clinical academic program that applies music and sound to the treatment of cancer and other diseases. So it's I think it's amazing stuff, so I hope we'll get a chance. And it's currently turning into a Memphis-wide initiative that involves the leading educational, research, artistic, religious organizations, individual groups, and so on.
Yeah, one more minute on it, they're prescribing music for patients. This isn't music therapy, this is neuroscience.
Well, it goes, pardon me? Yes, actually, I'm having talks with St. Jude as well.
Well, we're just glad you're here, and we are blessed. Thank you, Jacques.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.